the Assistant Program Manager here at Malama Aina Foundation. I haven't met a lot of you, so hello everyone. Happy Aloha Friday. Let's get started and get enlightened and inspired by the stories that each of our speakers have to share with us today. So without further ado, let's introduce our first speaker, Dr. Richmond.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for the opportunity to speak to a very important group of people about something that I'm very passionate about, and that's science and the work that I and my colleagues do. So by way of background, the best way to describe myself in terms of the work I do is a marine biologist. And so I get a chance to do a lot of cool things in the ocean, which is one of my favorite places to be. But I'll also say that I'm an accidental marine biologist in that when I was in school, in middle school and beyond, I really didn't have a clue that I would end up doing all the cool things that I'm doing now. I was the kid in the classroom who was always staring out the window. I hated being indoors. And so anytime there was a chance to go outdoors, I was one of the first one out. And so I knew that as I looked at opportunities for the future, I wanted something that met several of the important criteria for me. Number one, opportunities to be outdoors. I loved animals. I grew up in a city in New York in an apartment building and didn't like it at all and much preferred to be outdoors. And when I was young, when I was 11 years old, I got a chance to join the Boy Scouts and get out and go camping and go in the woods. And eventually I got a job teaching what was called woods lore about animals and plants in a beautiful place in the mountains of New York. And I had everything from skunks and raccoons to baby foxes. And if it moved, crawled, or lived under a rock, I was able to keep it and raise it. And it was that fascination with nature that was my motivation of wanting to do cool things that were outdoors and that were tied to the environment. And my goal was always to be a wildlife biologist. When I got to college, I had a few bumps along the road, and you'll find everybody who's had a career has a few bumps along the way. I'm not complaining, but just making an observation that my parents got divorced when I was 2, so I grew up in a single family home, a single parent home. As a result, I didn't have a whole lot of parental guidance throughout my life, which I don't complain about. But it taught me early on in life that doesn't matter as much as your own inspiration and desire to do something. And I came to the conclusion very early in life that my success was dependent upon me. And a lot of people contributed to it, both family and non-family. But the idea was that if I was going to succeed, I really needed to take responsibility for myself, look for opportunities, and do everything that I could. When I was finishing high school and got an opportunity to go to college, there were a couple of colleges that offered me scholarships, which wasn't enough to make it. I didn't really have any support otherwise, so I ended up working 3 jobs during my first 2 years in school. I was able to cut that down to 2 jobs in my 3rd year. And my 4th year, I actually got jobs working at the university doing research, which paid much better. I was working as a cook and a bartender and working for a catering service, driving truck. And so there's nothing wrong with that. And it gave me a lot of life experience that's really served me well otherwise. The program I got into didn't have a degree in marine biology, and they certainly didn't have wildlife biology. They had primarily pre-med if I wanted to be a doctor, and I didn't. And so I had to be creative in being able to move forward. And accidentally, I got a notice about a chance to go and work on a coral reef in the Caribbean during my junior year and spend a semester there. And being in the winter at Rochester, New York, with about 8 feet of snow accumulated outside the window, I decided this sounded really cool to be in a tropical island, warm water where you could see where you're going. And the rest is history. I got a break working in a little island in the Caribbean called Carriacou, part of the Grenadines. Even though after I graduated from college, I went on to take a job in the Caribbean rather than go on to graduate school. And the reason was I felt that I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew this was an option to consider. And so rather than going on to graduate school where I had an opportunity, the laboratory I was working in was pretty cool, doing radiation biology and biophysics. The reason I was brought in is I knew how to catch crayfish. And crayfish, like miniature lobsters living in streams, have this cool ability to accumulate radiation in the environment if they're downstream from a nuclear power plant. So they needed somebody who could go out into streams and rivers at all times of year, catch crayfish, and then bring them into the laboratory and figure out what they're doing. And as a result, I had an offer to stay in this really cool laboratory doing serious science, but decided with the advice of my mentor, get a little bit more life experience while I could, and then decide what I wanted to do. So I went back to the Caribbean. I worked in a small island. I connected with local fishermen, and I learned a lot of really good marine biology for them. So I had my academic training, which was quite different than the practical training of going out. Am I unmuted? Okay.
Yes.
Being able to look at the birds, the way they're flying, look at the way the currents were moving. And I learned a whole different kind of marine biology from fishers and traditional practitioners than I learned at a university setting. And that set me on my career. And I'll show you a few slides now of the cool things that I've been able to do. I got very excited about the ability to bring the best of science. I love science. It's exciting. Every morning it's a challenge when I come into the laboratory to discover new things. But I also was very concerned about what I call so what science. So what do you do with it? Why does it matter? And I learned working with island fishers and island communities, there was a real need to bring together the best of traditional knowledge like we find in Hawaii and throughout the Pacific with modern science to be able to solve problems. So if I can share my screen, if this will actually work. And I go like this. Can you see my screen? Okay. So these two pictures, I call myself the accidental marine biologist because it was totally by accident. I started getting breaks there. In the left-hand panel is Palau, the Rock Islands, where I do a lot of my work, one of the most magnificent places on Earth. And to the right is another one of the coral reefs I study. This is in the island of Guam, where I lived for 18 years working at the University of Guam. And just to kind of give you a map, this is the Pacific. So if we go up here in the upper right-hand corner is Hawaii, where we are. This is not really what the Pacific looks like with a map of the United States, but if you know how big the United States is, I work in Hawaii. I lived in Guam for 18 years and still do a lot of work there. I spent a lot of my time in Palau studying coral reefs, up in the Northern Marianas, throughout all 4 states of the Federated States of Micronesia. I spend time working in the Marshall Islands, where I still do work, and then down to American Samoa. So here is my office, is the entire Pacific, basically. Recently, I've been doing work in New Zealand with the Maori community on marine protected areas. So I wanted a job that would take me to exciting places outdoors, and STEM was the gateway to take me to the most amazing places in the world that are not only naturally beautiful, but I get a chance to work with some of the coolest people on Earth. This upper left-hand corner is a sailing canoe. This is the village where Mau Pialug came from. Some of you may have heard his name. Mau is the one who taught Nainoa Thompson how to sail the Hokulea. So this is where it all started, on a little island called Satawal. I work with the chiefs in this part of the world. So as a scientist, they actually need some help from time to time. They had a ship grounding and a lot of damage. So I went down to Satawal and got a chance to visit the place where people do traditional knowledge and sailing canoes. Below that is a traditional breadfruit kite. So I got to work with fishermen who don't use fishing line or nylon, but they use breadfruit kites with pandanus line to catch fish. They sail it over the reef. And a lot of the work I do is with stakeholders here as well. So on any given day, I can be in a remote atoll in the Pacific, learning and sharing knowledge with traditional navigators and traditional practitioners. Or I can be doing what I affectionately call my other job, is working what I call Dr. Dolittle science. A lot of people know Dr. Dolittle as the person who talks to animals. For me, the important part of that is he listens to animals. And that's basically what I do. Is for those of you that are really old, this is Rex Harrison, Eddie Murphy. Some people know as Dr. Dolittle. This is his daughter, and this is the most recent version. But in life, you'll learn there's a difference between talking to animals and people and listening to animals and people. I have 2 dogs and a cat. I talk to them a lot. Doesn't make any difference. If I tell the dog not to chew on the cat or my flip-flops, doesn't make much of a difference. But using modern techniques and traditional techniques, I can actually listen to corals and ask them what's wrong. And so sometimes you don't need a PhD to figure out what's wrong. I spent a lot of time underwater scuba diving. This was an accident where a cable was dropped and sheared off the top of a reef. And so some of my time is spent underwater surveying not only damaged areas, but beautiful areas to try to understand what the ecosystem is doing and how it's working. And one of the things that I've been working on throughout my career is the ability of coral reefs to live. And one of the ways in which they live, just like cats and dogs and chickens and people, corals reproduce and make babies. And they do it during a very, very limited time each summer, 7 days after the summer full moon at 8 p.m. We know that in this upper left hand, this is under a microscope, the coral colony with its tiny polyps will begin to push eggs and sperm up in the colony. They release these into the water where they float around. And these are two of my summer interns from Palau. So a lot of the students who work in my lab are native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. So here are two college students, community college students from the island of Palau who spent the summer in my laboratory learning how to collect the eggs from the coral when they released, fertilize them in the laboratory and make coral babies. And then we use this as a Dr. Dolittle science. They can teach us if water quality is okay, and we can understand how coral reefs live or when they're in trouble. A lot of the cool things I do is working with students. So I work with students like you guys today. I work with high school students and a lot of college students. And these are a number of my graduate students that are doing experiments in the laboratory. So one of my favorite parts of my job is being able to use what I've learned and share it with others, especially students. And so here are two of my students doing an experiment on some pollutant effects on corals, where we put little corals in beakers. We treat them with different amounts of chemical, can be a pesticide, a heavy metal, it can be sunscreen. And then we give them air and then we study how they react to it. So the corals can tell us a lot if we use our Dr. Dolittle science at what levels oil spills or pesticides become an issue. And then we can take that science and help people understand how we can do a better job of protecting coral reefs. When we say coral reef management, we're not really managing corals, we're managing people. And that's one of the cool things I get to do in my job, is provide the information in a form and a format that people can use to do good things to help coral reefs survive. This is a picture on the left-hand side, Palau, one of the sites in which I work. This is actually my wife diving with me on the right-hand panel. So another big part of my job that I love so much is not only do I get to go to the coolest places in the world, but I get to take my family with me. And so to me, family has always been very important. And I wanted a job where I wasn't away from my family, but rather where I could engage with my family. And not only do I take my wife diving in really cool places, but my daughter as well. And so this is her when she was 14. This is a place called Jellyfish Lake in Palau. It's one of the most amazing wonders of the world, where my daughter was able to swim with millions of jellyfish. They don't sting, and to be able to see the world through her eyes and go to these incredible reefs. And during this dive, we had 5 sharks swim by, a bunch of turtles, a manta ray, and to be able to allow my daughter to share this experience with me has been one of the greatest things in the world as well. And then on another thing, so I can be teaching, I can be doing research. This is me 2 weeks ago testifying before Congress because of the close down in COVID. Normally I would fly to Washington, DC, which I do 4 to 5 times a year. This is in my extra bedroom in our house in Apuimanu, Kaneohe, having to wear a jacket and tie because I'm testifying before Congress. And underneath my feet, I was wearing pants, but my dog was right at my feet, very noisily licking various body parts throughout this testimony. So it was a very unique experience. But so I get to do science, I get to do teaching, I get to go to cool places, and I get to use my science for the so what part of being able to what we call move from knowledge to action. And when I say knowledge, that includes traditional knowledge like we find in the Hawaiian community and in the Pacific Island communities. And I'm able to bridge the best of modern science with traditional knowledge, and knowledge, in this case, science, into the policy realm. So that's a pretty good overview of the kinds of things that I do on a daily basis. And I will stop here and stop my share and turn it back to the conveners.
Thank you very much, Dr. Richmond. That was very enlightening. Um, Anybody, if anybody has questions, just to give you guys a heads up, we're going to save the questions until after all the panelists are done. So before we get started again, just to remind you folks, we will be holding questions off until the ending after all panelists have had their time. All right. So moving forward, we have Dr. Megan Ross.
Hi,
Good
everyone.
morning.
Good morning. It's nice to meet you all on this nice Friday. We're excited. I'm going to share some slides with you guys. Yeah. And when I do this, can you guys tell me if you see black boxes, or do you just see the slides?
Just a slide.
Perfect. Okay, so here I am. I'm Megan Ross, and I'm assistant professor of biology at UH West Oahu, which is in Kapolei. And I'm part of the Mathematics, Natural, and Health Sciences division. And so we're kind of all of our math and science put together because we're a really new degree program here at West Oahu. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and my journey here, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what I get to do in my career. So I'm originally from Michigan. I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I'm from where University of Michigan is. I was born and raised there. And so when I graduated from high school, I didn't really know what to do. I'd wanted to be a marine biologist since I was 3. The lore is that I was at the National Aquarium in Baltimore and I saw a shark, and they tried to drag me away from the shark, and I had a fit. And then I wanted to be a marine biologist and only study sharks. I was that kind of marine biologist, only wanted to study sharks for the rest of my kind of childhood. But I didn't really know what that meant, and I didn't really know how to pursue it. And so I ended up applying to University of Michigan because that was my hometown, and I got in, and I started to look into marine biology classes. But I don't know if any of you have been to Michigan. It looked like this. This is my grandma's house, on a lake, right? So a body of water, but not really what I was looking for while I was taking a class on coral reefs, which all the pictures looked like that. So this wasn't particularly inspiring. I had kind of a hard time. It's hard to be motivated when you want something that you don't have access to. And I ended up taking a break and working in the nursing home that my mom worked in as a physical therapy assistant, and just kind of living my life for a little bit. And then I got the opportunity to move to Maui. So I lived in Kula on Maui starting in 2002, way back when it was Maui Community College. And I got into a program there called the Marine Option Program. And I wasn't necessarily an accidental marine biologist, but I really was kind of struggling for how to get where I wanted to be. And while I was in Michigan looking for things to do, I looked up Maui Community College and I found a program called the Marine Option Program. And I cold called the advisor and I was like, hey, I'm interested in this program. And the guy was like, oh, you don't want that. That's a certificate program and it's not really useful. It's not going to help you in your career. Now, I'm not telling you guys to be stubborn. And I'm not proud of how stubborn I am, but I was like, nah, I'm going to try it anyway. So I show up at Maui Community College, I go to the room and I talk to the advisor for that program. And she was like, yes, great. You're definitely doing this. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you take this class on the Big Island. And I was like, no. I don't know where that island is yet. I don't really understand. I'm not sure this is for me. But I ended up going, and it was called QUEST, or the Quantitative Underwater Ecological Surveys Techniques class. And at the time, it was run in Puako, and we learned about how to survey things. We learned in the classroom first, and then we got to go out scuba diving. And then we took all of the data that we collected and we analyzed it, and it was hard, but it was also so much fun. And I met my first network. I met all of the people that I still work with today. I mean, I don't want to put too much pressure on Quest, but I met my husband there. I mean, this is my closest friends. Like only one friend was able to make it to my wedding in Michigan, and I met her at Quest. Like it was just such a formative experience that I didn't even want to do. But I found a mentor and she was like, oh no, you're going. And so then because I went, I didn't realize what a big deal this was, but it meant that I got to go with those folks to Kaho'olawe with Kirk to do some survey work there. I got to work with the University of Hawaii at Manoa Botany Department because they would come to Maui and they just needed somebody who could dive. And so we got to go out in these really cool, what turn out to be endemic, so only found here, Halimeda, it's a type of limu algae, beds that are out there. I got to go to all these cool places. I got to camp and do like water quality and some genuinely gross water, but I got to do some like water analysis. So I got all of this opportunity at a community college. And what this did for me is it showed me what it meant to be a marine biologist. You can say you want to do it, you can say you only like sharks, but there's so much more to it. And so by finding that mentor, by reaching out and asking for help, and then just showing up, I got to do some genuinely cool stuff. I ended up moving over to Oahu. I got my bachelor's degree in marine biology at UH Manoa. And again, I went to the coordinator's office and he was like, I've got a job for you. I was like, you've got a what? Like, I got here yesterday. You've got a job for me? And he was like, yeah, you're going to go to the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. And I was like, what's that? And he was like, well, they call it Coconut Island and it's in Kaneohe. I'm like, where's Kaneohe? And they were like, okay, so you're going to get in your car, you're going to go over the H3. I'm driving over the H3. There's mountains and palm trees and tunnels. I'm used to Maui. I've never been to Oahu. They're like, no, you're going to meet me at the lighthouse. I'm going to meet you at the where? They're like, just take the van to get the boat to meet me at the lighthouse. And then you're going to have this interview. So I'm like sweating in my then boyfriend's car that doesn't have AC, like freaking out, trying to get over the H3. I get out there and I meet this woman and she's like, have I got the job for you? And I was like, cool. She's like, you're going to study disease. And I was like, that sounds terrible. I want to study sharks. And they were like, yeah. But I mean, it's all transferable skills. You're going to learn a lot. And I was like, sharks or nothing. And they were like, no, you're going to do this. So again, you just show up. You're like, okay, I'll play ball. We're looking at tumors on things. So fibropapilloma tumors on turtles and on fish, and we're looking at gut parasites. Like I was taking out guts of fish and looking at worms in them, and I'm like, I don't want to eat them. But and then Cole skin cancer. And then they're like, you're going to study coral disease. And I was like, that sounds made up. Like coral have disease? And they were like, yes, coral have disease. So there was this coral and you would watch it. I would go back to this coral every single month for months on end, and I would watch it and see what happened. So this little white patch down here, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, was the disease. And I would watch how fast it killed the coral. So this is in 2006. And then when we went back in 2007, like the whole thing had died. So this is when I really started not only liking coral a whole lot, but started thinking about how we solve problems. So this job that I didn't even really love, I started to really get into how we observe things and how we analyze those data. And I totally switched, and coral is what I study to this day. I also took a detour and I worked in the hyperbaric treatment facility at Kuakini Hospital. And so it's just, you kind of get these opportunities and they're really different. But in the end, I think that it just makes you who you are. So my journey was just asking for help, even if it's hard, and then taking a chance and trying out new things. I ended up getting into the PhD program at UH Manoa again, and I got to do lots of cool stuff. Through this program, I was in a lab with Dr. Kaipo, and we were part of a monitoring program that took us to all of the main Hawaiian islands. We would survey reefs. And then I started doing my own work where, again, I would follow these colonies. So this is me with my little picture of my colonies. And I would go back to Maui every month and I would find those colonies again. So they're like my little friends. And you would watch them to see how they did. And so by doing that, we were able to capture a bleaching event that happened out at Molokini, which is supposedly one of our most protected areas, but things like bleaching can still reach it. So I got to try and find creative ways to solve issues that resource managers were having. So I helped them find out what was killing some of the corals on Maui. One of the things that we knew was going on was sewage. So wastewater was coming up at a site called Kalailoa. And so we got there and we saw some of the coral wasn't looking really good. And I was with my friend. And I was like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do? I have an idea. Let's put out measuring tapes over an entire reef, and then we'll survey the coral in each of those cells. So we did that 1,115 times. And I would spend like 8 hours a day underwater. And it was brutal, but it was the coolest thing I've ever done, because you got to really look and see and find a different way to solve a problem and provide resource managers with then a kind of heat map of where things were okay in blue and maybe not so okay in red. And then it took another turn. I got an opportunity to take some of the pictures that we took through our monitoring program and look at how they had changed over time. And again, I was like, I don't know if this is for me, because they said, we're going to do some numerical modeling. And I said, and they said, it's math. And I said, and they said, no, you can do this. And I was like, okay. And so I tried it. And we took all of our little colonies, we collected data about them, and then I got to go to Rostock, Germany, to meet with people from all over the world. It was an international cohort, and we were able to learn how to do this really specific type of modeling through coding in a program called R. I don't know if you guys have heard of that yet, but if you want to go into marine biology, you might one day. So I got to learn computer programming and numerical modeling, and again, find a way to solve a problem. And then I got to take all of that, all of this whole journey of things I never even wanted to do, and present it in Australia at the International Coral Reef Symposium. And my dream, like my dream, since I had been 3 and then 13 and figuring out what marine biology was to dive on the Great Barrier Reef. And I was actually lucky enough to be able to do that just by showing up, asking questions, reaching out for that help, and then taking it. And I love sharing that with people, because if I can do it, I really feel like you can do it too. So if ever you want to know more about that, please let me know. Throughout this whole process, I really got a lot of opportunity to reach out and teach. I got to do that with little kids. I got to do that in really informal ways, like at the Waikiki Aquarium. And then I actually got to go back and teach at Quest, where I very first learned how to do marine biology. And not only did I teach at Quest, I taught about something completely different than I ever thought. I taught statistics. I ended up getting a job at UH West Oahu, and I like to show this picture of our campus because this is our mala. We have a hale that was built there by one of our staff. And one of my favorite things about West Oahu is that I get to teach outside a lot. We have really small class sizes, and I get to do what I love, and I get to share that with my students, and I get to know my students. I teach biology, ecology, statistics, research methods. But I also get to do research with my students. So we did some algal surveys at Oneula Beach Park. We got to go out to the fish pond out at Sand Island, Mokawea. We got to go to Maili or Miley, however you want to say, and do surveys for class. And we get to do some really cool restoration work out at Kalailoa, which is part of the Pearl Harbor National Wildlife Sanctuary. And it's this space that had kind of been used by the military and really changed over time. So we get to work on native plant species out there. So not only do I get to teach, which I love, I get to teach outside, which I love, and I get to do research with students that can be used by the community to, again, solve problems like I was able to do in graduate school. So that's all I have to share with you guys for now. I look forward to talking to you more.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ross. That was a very interesting presentation. So our next speaker is Dr. Juan Guerra, who works for the Hawaii Wildlife Center. So go ahead, Dr. Juan.
All right. Hey, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me well. Thank you so much for having me today. For me, it's just going to be talking to you. I don't have cool slides, although now that I think about it, there's some cool pictures of horses and CT machines that are pretty cool that I probably could have digged up. But anyway, my name is Juan. I work at the Hawaii Wildlife Center. I'm a veterinarian. And then just to give you a quick summary of where I came from. I was born in El Salvador, and then my mom and I moved to New York City when I was 9 years old. My dad lived in New York City prior to that. So I grew up in New York in a town called Far Rockaway. From there, I went to my local high school, went to Cornell University in upstate New York, totally different from New York City, for a degree in biology and then veterinary medicine. Once I graduated from vet school, I did an internship in equine general practice in New York as well. Once I did that, went and practiced as a veterinarian in Pennsylvania. Then I came here to the Big Island and to practice again as a veterinarian. Went to Oregon State University, and then now I've come back here to the Big Island. But it hasn't been a straight, line that this is what I wanted to do and, the places I want to see. I think most of you are in middle school, and I think when I think back when I was in middle school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Probably at the time I was thinking I'll probably do something in business or in computers because that's what was cool at the time, and it wasn't really until high school that I really started to have an idea of, okay, maybe I'll pursue this. So what ended up happening is I've always been interested in horses. In El Salvador, my grandma lived in the countryside. It's kind of familiar to the dry side of the islands here. I was just in Oahu last week, and we went to like Eva Beach in that area, Kapolei, and that really reminded me of where I grew up as far as kind of an arid, hot climate. But my grandma lived in the countryside. She didn't have horses. She had cattle, but occasionally I would see someone with a horse go by, and I always thought they were very cool. And when I went to New York City, it's a city, but when you take the train into the city, we always went by Aqueduct Racetrack, and there would be horse racing over there. We had a local channel that you could watch the races, and I just started watching it just to see the horses. And then I asked my parents to take me there, which is not the place you think of, like, oh, why does a kid want to go to the racetrack? But I was just interested in seeing the horses and taking pictures of them. And then that just grew into, I want to do more with them. And they were able to afford to have me take a few riding classes in a nearby riding school. And I just decided, actually, I did see, injuries sometimes happen at the racetrack, and a horse fell and had its leg broke. And that kind of inspired me to become a veterinarian, because I thought, there's so much that we can do for people when they break a leg, but why can't we do this with horses? So I decided that I wanted to become a horse veterinarian. That led me to, go to university for that. Again, there's been challenges throughout everything. Far Rockaway is not really known nowadays for sending a lot of kids to college. My high school unfortunately got closed a few years after I graduated because it was underperforming. Not a lot of kids were graduating. So that was kind of an initial challenge. But in that school, I did have lots of teachers that were supportive of all of us and really pushed us to pursue what we wanted to do. I was also very lucky in having my mother that was very supportive of, again, letting me do what I wanted to do. And when it came time to apply for college, I didn't really think I could get into the one that I wanted to go to, which was Cornell University. Uh, and it came down to like the last week, and it's like, I'm not gonna have time to finish this in time, but she pushed me to apply for it, and then I put the envelope in the mail the last day that you could possibly send it to, and I got in. And I, there was a point there that if she had not pushed me, I probably would not have applied to the university, and then that probably changed the course of my life from that point, as well as many other branches in life. So that's how I got to Cornell University. When I was in college, my father passed away in my sophomore year, in my second year of college. It was towards the end of the semester. So, there's the emotional trauma that you go through that when that happens. And there were financial worries as far as, am I going to be able to stay in college with only having, a one parent helping me through it. But, thankfully we got through it. My mom, again, was very supportive of it. Thankfully, the university, the people there were really helpful in helping you stay there, and finding aid wherever they could. So that was really helpful. And also my friends in college, they helped me get through that semester. My father had just passed away. I think that was like the second time that I got the flu, and trying to get through finals when you have flu is not fun at all. And then also at the time, she was my friend, but that's where I met my now fiance of 13 years in college. And again, she was very supportive of me during that time. So I got through that. We were able to get financial aid and get through the rest of college and vet school. Same thing happened when I applied to vet school. I didn't think I would get in, but I had people supporting me, and then I thankfully I did get in. And then another challenge throughout my career that it's still an ongoing thing is that again, life is not a straight line. I wanted to become an equine surgeon back when I was in high school, and I didn't really know what it entailed to be an equine surgeon, an equine veterinarian. But I did have an open mind throughout my entire career. We had people that would come to the university to do presentations on, say, wolf conservation, and my now fiance, my girlfriend, was interested in birds. And I do want to put a shout out to her, in that she's from Hawaii, and she was interested in native Hawaiian bird conservation, and she made the leap to go from Oahu to New York to study. And that's a really long distance to leave your family to go do something else. And that's another theme that I want to tell you guys about, to not be afraid of going long distances to pursue your dreams. For me, it's been the other way around. I consider New York my home, but I met her, and she has kind of driven me here into Hawaii, and that's been a really long distance to move. But she was interested in birds. That kind of sparked my interest in wildlife. And throughout my equine career, on the side, I've been doing some birding. I took classes on ornithology, the study of birds. And during vet school, I took classes on doing medicine on birds. So it's always been a side interest. And throughout my career, I went through a couple of practices. I practiced general ambulatory medicine in Pennsylvania, where you are in a truck. You go to farms and you look at horses, and you do all of your diagnostics and medicine in the field. And I can talk more about what it is like to be a veterinarian, if you guys have questions about that. Then I moved to the Big Island, and here again, I was a general practitioner, where I practice on cats, dogs, and horses up here in Waimea. Again, more of the same, going to farms, to the horses. People would bring in their pets for, neuters and spays, Skin problems was a common thing that we looked at. And I help at the Hawaii Wildlife Center as a volunteer, helping them with their patients, such as Nene with broken legs, broken wings. We would bring them into the clinic up in Waimea to take x-rays. And that was really fun, being able to help them with their cases, and knowing that these were endangered Hawaiian species that we needed to raise awareness of. Not a lot of people know what species we have on the islands, and that they are endangered, and that we've already lost tons of them in the past, and we will lose more if we don't do something about it. So it was good to help them in that endeavor. But again, I was still kind of tunnel vision focused. I want to be an equine surgeon. So I decided to leave Hawaii, go to Oregon State University, and do what's called a fellowship. And it's, to do a surgery, you have to do a residency, and that entails 3 years of intensive studies in a hospital to become boarded in a specialty. The fellowship was just more of a taste of it. I rotated through surgery, through internal medicine, and essentially you got to try to be a resident for a year. And I gave that a try, and it was very good in that I got to practice what I thought I wanted to do. And while I can say it is incredibly fun, it just, when I was able to ask myself, is this what I wanted to do? And the answer was no, in that I would have to give up a lot that was important to me, as far as my girlfriend in Hawaii, being away from her for a long time, and the lifestyle afterwards. It was just something that it really wasn't for me. And that's a hard thing to do, to change your mind when you have decided to do something. But you have to look at the other things that are in your life that are important, and you may want to pursue those, and that's okay. It's okay to change your mind. So at that point, I decided I wanted to come back to the Big Island. My fiance was still living here after going to college in New York and Pennsylvania. And the opportunity opened up to work at the Hawaii Wildlife Center, not really as a veterinarian, but as a wildlife rehabilitation manager. And this was completely, relatively new. I have wet my toes in that field by helping them out, but all of my experience was in something else. So again, I applied. I didn't think I would get it, and I did. So that's how I've landed in my current job. So essentially, life, throws you lots of opportunities, and it's up to you to decide which ones you take and which ones you pass. There's no right or wrong answers. And, as I look back, there's many points in my life where I could have done something completely different. And it's interesting to imagine what life would have been like. But on the other hand, I wouldn't give up all of the people that I have met along the way, and all of the experiences that I've had. So, it's really it's not so much about the destination of where you want to get to, but it's also important to enjoy the journey. I know I probably talked a lot about this, but just to give you a quick summary of what it's like to be a veterinarian and be in wildlife rehabilitation. In vet school, you get to do a little bit of everything. You study about all your domestic species: cats, dogs, horses, goats, alpacas, llamas, etc., cattle. And then during your final year, you are in the clinical hospital working on patients along with your mentors, your chief clinicians, your residents that are studying to become specialists. And you get to practice some really cool things. Like I said, in vet school, we had a CT scanner. So you would have to anesthetize horses, cats, and dogs, put them in the scanner. You get 3D views of their organs. I think during the next presentation, I'll try to bring some pictures of that. During my internship, I worked at a full service equine hospital. So we did ambulatory work where we went to farms, but we also had horses come in. And they stayed in the hospital for care. A lot of them were what we call colic, when they have abdominal pain. Sometimes it's just simple indigestion. They just eat something, they're essentially gassy, and you can get them through with a little bit of medicine. And other times we have to do full-fledged surgery, and you can imagine the task of doing surgery on an animal that's 1,000 pounds. You need hoists, you need really big tables, really big anesthesia machines. So that was incredibly fun to do. After that, in Pennsylvania, I did general ambulatory medicine, again, going to farms. Here on the Big Island, similar, worked at a small animal practice, and got to do a little bit more of your typical, what you expect a veterinarian to do as far as space, neuters. And then now at the Hawaii Wildlife Center, I've shifted to doing work with birds. And, you know, I can talk a little bit about doing wildlife rehabilitation, in that it's slightly different. Not everybody that does it has to be a veterinarian. A lot of people just go to college, get a biology degree. Some people actually go from high school and they just start building the experience, and then eventually they get the opportunity to be a wildlife rehabilitator. And it's a lot of apprenticeship and doing internships in that field to learn the husbandry of taking care of birds, and learn the basic, you know, medicine in combination with working with a veterinarian. So I guess that's, I'll kind of leave it at that. If you have any questions, you know, feel free to ask me. But thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Juan Guerra. That was really interesting to hear about, you know, how to become a veterinarian and your experiences. So our final speaker for today is Dr. Kaipo Perez.
Oh, what a tough crowd to finish after. Okay, aloha mai o Kaipo Koinoa no Honolulu mai iau no hau I Honolulu. O hapa wau ma ke kahi o hana lawai a makamukupuni o ke ave ma Kohala. Makamukupuni o Oahu ma Kaimuki wa ma Waimanalo. Aloha mai, my name is Kaipo Perez III. I grew up on two moku, or two islands, the island of Oahu and Kaimuki and Waimanalo, as well as the island of Hawaii in Kohala. So my family is originally from Kohala, and I would go there during the summer times to learn how to fish and dive. I grew up in Ohana Lawai'a, or fishing family. They taught me great lessons of stewardship and conservation. I learned from a young age how to read the ocean, how to read the weather, how to read the natural resources, whether they be the Haukiuki or the Manini or the war, whatever is swimming around, you know, going out in the middle of the night and doing kilo, or sitting down at the beach and watching the moon and the moon phases and how they affect the patterns of the different fish that were there. We really grew off feeding off the land and the ocean. I went to 3 different elementary schools here in Oahu. I was kind of a kolohe kid, and so I got myself into trouble, which ended my time at different elementary schools. And it wasn't really until high school that I started to buckle down, really focus in what I wanted to do in life. And that's really, you know, my high school marine biology teacher was probably one of the few teachers that actually believed in me and inspired me to go into marine biology. When I was in her class, she was like, all these marine biology topics, they come natural to you. Like, you know, you understand them from a different perspective. I think this is the path you should follow. So I, you know, majored in marine biology from the University of Hawaii Manoa. And during that time, I tried to seek different internships, so different kind of opportunities to participate in different research programs and do my own personal research along with professional researchers like Dr. Richmond, like Dr. Ross's and mine advisor, who's Dr. Paul Jokio. And actually stepping into the lab for the first time as a, you know, finding out that you're going to work with a coral biologist. You know, me growing up as a fisherman, going, oh my God, I have to work with corals. They don't move. They don't do anything. I know they're important, but they're still not as fun as fish. But in that short amount of time working with Dr. Drew Keel, and his, you know, the short amount of time that I had remaining with him in his life, that we were, you know, able to learn so much from him and his research, and able to bridge his knowledge from a Western perspective with knowledge from a traditional sense. So from our kupuna before that as well. And actually, when I was gonna finish up my marine biology degree, Paul basically asked what I was gonna do, and I said, "Well, I don't really know. I never thought I'd even get this far now. I never thought I'd be going to college." And so he said, I think you should go to grad school. I think you should be a good candidate. And I said, okay, sure, I'll go for my master's. And he told me, nope, if you're going to be my student, you have to go for your PhD. That's basically the threshold. So I said, okay, I'll do it. Worked really hard, had the support of our whole lab to really finish up my PhD really quickly. And in my dissertation, I was able to look at how basically the weather and different kind of factors impact the type of fish that are going to be found in the area, the environment we're going to be found in the area. And we figured out how the bottom of the ocean, what's there, dictates what kind of fish are going to be found in a particular area. And finally, the last part of my dissertation was probably the most significant and important to me, was bridging traditional Hawaiian knowledge with science and management to provide a holistic approach for future science and future management decisions that are going to be made. I got to interview some of the kupuna in the area, some of the elders in the area, to learn about their knowledge and see if the data we're collecting still matched up today. Not to question that it was right or wrong, but to see if it still stands to today. If it doesn't, then why? What changed in the environment? What did people do to change that? I still keep in contact with that community. I still keep in contact with some of the kupuna in that area to continue that growth. Because once you're part of that community and you do that research, you're always part of that community. That means every time you stop by, to make sure that you drop off food if you can, or drop off something when you see them. While I was finishing up my doctoral degree, I was approached by the city to take on a position at Hanauma Bay. If you don't know and never been there before, Hanauma Bay is this wonderfully beautiful place. It has a lot of natural resources, but it's heavily used by either tourists or visitors that come to Hanauma Bay each day. Before I left there, I was in charge of the facilities and services. So all the buildings, all the workers had felt under my purview to make sure that we were operating fiscally responsible in how we did the park, as well as make sure the park was running smoothly. I think one of my highlights working for Hanauma Bay was that I got to brief President Obama and the Obama family a few times when they came to visit Hanauma Bay. While I was working at Hanauma Bay, I was actually stolen or basically sought out by the Navy to come and work for them as their marine resources subject matter expert. And so my typical day basically starts off at 5:30 in the morning. Between 5:30 in the morning and 8 o'clock is when I get to answer my emails, check whatever's on my computer, and make sure I do that, because at 8 o'clock I usually have my first meetings, and meetings will last typically all day, addressing any other projects. What I do for the Navy is any in-water work, so construction of a new pier, in-water training, the detonation of unexploded ordnance or bombs, basically from old trainings or old, like the bombing of Pearl Harbor. We still have, they still find 5-inch rounds in Pearl Harbor. So if we have to do a controlled explosion, then all of those kind of consultations and permitting that we need for environmental have to be done by myself and get across my desk and approved before we can do any of that work. Some of the cool things I was able to do as working for the Navy is, I got to work on the fish pond that we're trying to restore right now, called Loko Paiao. We were hoping to get you guys out there to go and visit, but because of construction on an adjacent area, we're unable to get you folks out there, but we hopefully will be able to get future classes out there to come and visit. I got to ride the destroyer Michael Murphy from Honolulu to Maui, and I got to bring my family with me and see how they operate. Go on their, go to the officers' bathrooms or watch them shoot off their rounds to see what they do and why they do it. I think there's sometimes a feeling that people think that the Navy just wants to hurt and harm, but there is actually some secret and top secret reasons why they do what they do, why they're there, why they have all of these things going on. I guess another cool thing for work for the Navy is that I get to control the impact to natural resources on such a huge amount of land. The Navy is one of the biggest landowners in the state. And because of the work I get to do is I work with a lot of admirals and captains, guys who answer directly to the president. And in fact, last year, the year before last, actually, being awarded by an admiral for the work that I was able to do in such a short amount of time. I think one of the things we got to go over too is, like some of the trials that we've had in our life and how that's impacted us. Well, like I mentioned earlier, I was a super Kolohe kid. So I was super rascal, always getting into trouble. I found trouble wherever it can be found. And I think what it was is that I was actually bored. And sometimes I felt mistreated by the teachers that I had. They either wouldn't listen to me, or I would have the last choice of reading the book or choosing a book for the day. And I always had the books that were ratty or ripped apart and everything like that. And so I didn't feel valued. And they always had told me, I've heard about you already. You're that kid. And so I would give them everything they asked for. They said I was a kid that was bad, so I was going to be the bad kid. I didn't come from a very wealthy family. My family lived on food stamps to pay for things, lived on, family assistance from the government. And it's okay, had it not been for those kinds of programs, I may not be here today either. I wasn't the smartest kid, but, I learned to study hard, but more than study hard, just study smart. And, I had to be mentored. I went to things like Kumon, which I kind of got kicked out of, and then went to Sylvan, and the Sylvan teachers were really good. I still talk to a couple of them till today. I was horrible at writing, very, very horrible. Megan can probably tell you. I probably had the writing of a second grader when I was in college. But I just practiced and practiced and practiced and kept writing. When I was in college classes, I felt alone, in the upper level marine biology classes, because there were very few local kids. And even more than that, there were very few Hawaiian kids in my classes. But that feeling of being alone was more of my mental battle than anything else, because I actually was part of a larger family of individuals that may not have been here, but we all had the same struggles. One of the other things that I have trials is working in science management or the military as a Native Hawaiian. Some Native Hawaiians kind of write me off as being a sellout, not being happy with the work that I do. But I tell them at the end of the day, I have my kuleana and my ideals. So I want to do what's best for the environment within reason, but also being realistic. But also, if it's not me who's in that position, then it can be someone who is not from here, who doesn't understand. And so being a voice within rather than being a voice outside is really, really important. And that's not to say that having someone from the outside is bad either. Having a different perspective is also good too. But having local kids who've, I'm sure places where you guys swim, you guys know where certain types of fish are going to be found. If you're going to the forest, you know where you're going to find the pua or the fruits or the vegetables or the different birds. And that kind of knowledge cannot be taught within a short amount of years. So you come with a breadth of experience and knowledge that some take a lifetime to learn. It's just that lucky you grew up in families where they had that kind of knowledge. And then finally, it's talking about, what do you need to succeed? So I want to be real quick here. Just having a growth mindset. So having the grit when all things are hard and you don't think you can do it, just keep pushing through, because grit is going to get you through and through all the time. When I would hire people for the city, or when we talk about hiring people for the Navy, my thing is we need someone with grit who is going to push through no matter what to get to the destination they're going to get through, because you're going to encounter challenges. And sometimes grit is has more value than just being smart. You need to view challenges as opportunities. You need to embrace your weaknesses. For myself, one of my weaknesses is, and I've been told multiple times, is that local kids don't know how to talk well about themselves, and that we're really humble. So in different situations, like applying for a NOAA job or applying for the Navy, you need to speak highly about what you can do, and don't be ashamed about that. Mai hile hile, hula hula oi. Just dance. Don't feel failure. Think of it as being a point of analysis and a point of growth. If you haven't failed today, then you haven't grown today. I guess seek people who can open doors. Dr. Richmond has opened a lot of doors for me to go through. He was on my dissertation committee. He's coached me for multiple job interviews. He was a mentor for school, but he was actually also a mentor for life. Keep in touch with your culture. Mai makauwi ka hana, makauwi ka moloa. Don't fear work, fear laziness. And not all of things are learned in one school. Also, practice makes perfect, but what you really want to do too is perfect practice makes perfect. A good example is if you decided to throw a basketball at the ground all the time, you will never learn how to make an accurate free throw. So make sure that you're practicing the right things. Again, I never thought I'd be here. So if I could be here, so can you. In 10, 15 years now, you guys can be the ones on the opposite side of these screens. And you guys can be the uncles and the aunties helping, kids like you who are the future grow where you need to be. Remember, be a good person, be the truest of your ideals and what you're going to do. And at the end of the day, do what you can do for your grandchildren's grandchildren, because that's how the Hawaiian Tiki is going to push us for the future. So I'll leave it at that. Mahalo. I'm sorry if I took longer than I needed to be. Aloha.
Okay, thank you so much to all of our speakers. It was so nice to hear from all of you and hear about your experiences and to learn more about your interesting careers. So right now we're going to move into questions. So I'm going to project our question sheet and we will get started. Okay, can everybody still see my screen? We all good? Okay, great. Okay, so for first question for Dr. Robert Richmond from Noel. So Noel, you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
How do you know what the coral needs to thrive, and how long did it take you to understand the coral so well?
Thanks very much, Joel. That's a great question, and I'm still learning. So I haven't figured it all out, but I was meant to be a coral biologist or marine biologist. I understand corals a lot better than I understand people. Corals can be really tricky, and every time you think you understand them, and something that Dr. Kaipo has said as well, that being in tune with your environment is not just about science in a laboratory or learning chemistry. It's about having a sense of place and a sense of being. And so for that reason, I've actually done much better because my interactions with people like Kaipo and with other Kupuna and others who have trained me from the indigenous knowledge point of view. There are certain things they need physiologically that you can look at just like people. They need energy to eat. Turns out that they're solar powered. So they get a lot of their energy from the sun through this relationship they have with tiny single cells of algae that live inside. So they're actually solar powered. So on one hand, we can see where corals are thriving and get a sense for what's going on there. And then we can also look at corals that are in trouble. So Megan showed some really interesting slides of coral diseases and other problems that are going on there. And so that's the cool part about science, that for all of us that had this kind of passion for knowledge and this inquisitiveness about trying to, the kid that's always asking why, being able to do that and to have it as a career and to be able to use tools and techniques to be able to answer those fundamental questions. We know far more about corals than we ever knew before. We have new tools and technology. So we do a lot of molecular biology, and we actually mooched a bunch of tools and techniques from human medicine, saying that, the main way we used to tell something was wrong in the coral reef was if the coral died. And if we did the same for human medicine, how really bad that would be. The idea is you shouldn't have to die to show there's a problem. So I actually work with people at the medical school and said, can we take some of the tools you use? If you get sick, you can go to your doctor. Sometimes they'll take a blood sample or take urine sample to try to find what's going on now. Turns out corals have the exact same kinds of proteins and diagnostic opportunities that we have for human health. And so that's what we've tried to do is exactly that. And while corals can't talk to you and say, I have a pain here, they can demonstrate it by a number of things they do or don't do. And so that's what's great about being able to pull together traditional knowledge, for which I have deep respect, as well as modern science. And between the marriage of the two, it's life's experience. And I think the best thing about STEM and science and life in general is I never stop learning. So I know more to this year than I knew last year, but I'm always looking forward to the point that next year I hopefully will know more than I know this year. Great question.
Thank you. Okay, so Nohealani, so he already did talk about his passion, his career. Nohealani, why don't you ask your next question about interesting sea creatures?
Okay. So the sea creatures, it's just never ends. That the beauty and the fascination with nature, and I think that goes back to your other question about the passion. It's just when you see things with such exquisite beauty, you can't help but say that, you can make the argument that economically coral reefs are worth $1 trillion, or they support the lives of 500 million people worldwide, or they protect our shorelines. But they're just exquisitely beautiful, and they're majestic, and they're magical. And anyone who can appreciate beauty in any form, whether it be art or nature, I think that's where part of the passion comes from. Some of the small things are the coolest things in the world, that a lot of people, when they scuba dive, they're all over the place. And one of my favorite things to do is just pick a spot, be careful when I lay down on the reef, not to hurt any living thing, but just to look at a very small area for a period of time. One of the things that I learned from a lot of my traditional colleagues that are fishers is to listen to the coral reef. A great local musician, Eddie Kamai, did a great video called Listen to the Forest, where people are used to it. If you go out into the woods, you don't have to see the bird to know that it's there. You can listen to the bird call or listen to the insect. People don't realize you can do the same thing underwater, that a good coral reef should sound like downtown Manila at rush hour. It should be this incredible noisy place. And it can be crabs and shrimps that are snapping. It can be fish like grunts or grouper that are pounding their swim bladders. And so there's so many ways in which you can use your senses. And so anywhere you look underwater on a thriving coral reef, you'll see nudibranchs and snails and fish, big things like manta rays and sharks, small things like the tiniest crabs and shrimp. And when I do my lesson for you guys in a couple of weeks, I'll actually show you how to do this kind of Dr. Doodle on a reef, what I've been taught of how you can actually tell what's there without even seeing them.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to some questions for Dr. Ross. So let's see. So I don't know if, I think Kolomona has logged off. So I'll ask his question for him. So he wanted to know if you could tell us more about zoology or biology.
Yes. So zoology and biology is a really, really huge field. You can do a lot with it. So it's basically anything that's living is biology. And then zoology is particularly about animals, but I ended up studying corals, which are technically related to jellyfish, cnidarians, but they have a symbiont that's photosynthetic. So I guess if there's specific questions about biology or zoology, I can answer them, but I think that the most exciting thing to me is how broad it is and that you can find it anywhere. And there's tools that, like Bob said, you can use in a lot of different ways. So things that you might be able to use in both humans and animals. I'm sure Juan has had that experience as well. So just that it's broad and you can find it anywhere, use it anywhere.
Thank you. Okay, Nate, I see you have 2 questions here. Why don't you choose one that you want to ask Dr. Ross? You can go ahead and unmute.
Okay. What got you interested in zoology?
Yeah, so I think I got interested in zoology again because I liked, we call it charismatic macrofauna, so basically big fancy things. So it was sharks that first got me interested in zoology, and then after that, I think like Bob said as well, there's lots of really small things. So as you get more and more into the field, you learn those basic tools that, like I say, are really broad and you can use everywhere. What blows your mind is how does this even exist? Like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen like shells or nudibranchs, are little sea slugs that really stand out to me, that they just look so weird. Looking at them and you're like, how did this even happen? So I think that just the complexity and how things are so the same, but at the same time so different from each other, and they're just really beautiful. So I think that's what got me interested in zoology. And then I think applying zoology to ecology just came from a place of wanting to understand, but also protect natural resources, I think was something that was very motivational to me.
Yeah, okay, let's move on to some questions for Dr. Juan Guerra. So let's see. So I know Denver, you had a pretty good question about something we saw in the video. So Denver, why don't you go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, did something happen that caused you to label the refrigerators? Is my microphone working?
There we go. Can you hear me now? Yes. I don't remember exactly which label it was. Kind of like the people refrigerator as opposed to the not people refrigerator. Denver, can you hear me?
Is my microphone working?
I think it is now.
Okay.
But yeah, like which label on the refrigerators, that we have to separate the bird one from the people one? Was that your question?
I was just asking, is there something like weird that happened? Like someone ate bird food?
I think what happened was that people would put in their lunch in the bird food refrigerator if we didn't put that in there, if we didn't put the sign, because sometimes you get busy and it's like, oh, fridge, and I'll just put it in there. So I don't think we had an actual incident. It was just more precaution.
Thank you. I know some of them are wondering if someone accidentally ate like the bird's fish or something.
Yeah, no, thankfully no, but.
Okay, so Haoli wasn't able to stay on, but he was wondering what it's like to care for a pu'eo, or the Hawaiian owl, what that's like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so working with pu'eo, working with iyo is, it depends what bird species or what bird you like the best. But they're very, raptors in general are very cool to work with. It depends what you have been exposed to as far as, seeing like a pueo or an eo on someone's glove and, interacting with them. But they're very, they have very interesting personalities, but they're also very defensive whenever you get near them. They will click their beak to inform you that they don't like what you're doing, but they don't necessarily go after you. They just warn you that they don't like what you're doing. They have very expressive eyes. If you go to our website, you'll probably see some photos of them with like really expressive eyes. And then watching them fly in our really big aviary is also a very fun thing to see. And definitely once we release them into the wild. But that's kind of how it goes with them. And they are carnivorous, so they do eat meat as opposed to some of the other ones that eat fish.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so our last speaker to ask questions. So we have our questions for Dr. Kaipo Perez. So how about, Noel, why don't you go ahead and ask your question? Noel, do you want to ask one of your questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
worries.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think there will be oysters in Pearl Harbor that people can harvest to eat?
I would hope that one day we could. The most extensive amount of fish ponds that we had in Hawaii were found in Pearl Harbor. And so hopefully one day we can restore, the water quality as well as the sediment quality. To be able to do that, we are very, very far away from doing that right now. But hopefully we can do those kinds of things to be able to have Pearl Harbor be a source of pearls again for folks. Yeah.
Thank you. And Nohelani, you want to ask our last question?
What does it mean to go blue?
So I think
What
she's
does it-
referring to the KHON interview that you did.
Oh, that's a long time ago, that KHON interview. Oh, Kalamai. When I was reading those questions, I was like, oh, I hope you guys don't ask that one. But I don't really remember what that context, what means to go blue is, but I think that, the Navy has a huge impact across the whole Pacific Ocean, and Pearl Harbor serves as a very, very critical point in Pearl Harbor. And so, being able to, just look at Pearl Harbor and hopefully be able to create areas in Pearl Harbor that no longer look disgusting when you look at them. Really fixing up the waterways that are entering into Pearl Harbor, the water quality, sediment quality, not only here in Hawaii, but us in Hawaii, even as a Navy, showing the world that we can hopefully restore, ocean health or reef health environment. I think that's what we were trying to go with.
Okay, folks, thank you so much. That was very interesting. I hope you guys take away and learned a lot from today. And I guess, one of the main things I want to point out is that everyone has their own journey. And however you choose to go through that journey is your call. There is no right or wrong. continue to strive for your dreams and make the most of it. Our speakers, thank you so much for that. That was very inspirational. Thank you for your time, your wonderful slides, your life stories. And yeah, that was amazing. So thank you very much for all of your attendance today. And I'm gonna just give over the room back to Leala and Mr. Rich. Aloha, everyone. Thank you again for attending.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Katie, and thank you to all our speakers as well. I do have one more question for Dr. Richmond. I understand that you traveled to American Samoa. Funny, I'm actually originally from American Samoa, and I have learned about one of the biggest corals there. And I was wondering if you have visited one of the biggest corals that we had over there. I think it was in one of the islands of Manua in Ta'u.
It's in Manua. It's called Big Mama, and it's one of the oldest corals because they actually drilled it. Corals put down annual bands, just like trees put down rings. And so one of the oldest and most interesting corals is there. And I've been out to those islands and they're magnificent. So it's impressive when you see a coral like that. That one's believed to be over 1,000 years old. We're pretty close to it. And that's one of the oldest around. You know, we have some really old ones here in Hawaii too. Maui actually has some on Olowalu that we call these natal corals. The sad thing is a number of them died off. We had a coral bleaching event in 2014, 2015, 2019. So there's no place on the face of the earth that is free from the effects of climate change. And that's why a lot of us in environmental science and biology and even human health are all focusing in on the biggest challenge of our lifetime, and that's getting climate change under control. But thankfully, I just talked to some people, my colleagues in American Samoa, so I still work with Tuatase, Lele Piao, and others down there. And so the good news is Big Mama is still there and alive.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you, Dr. Richmond, for sharing that. Again, thank you to all our speakers for sharing. Hopefully, we have future zoologists, biologists here with us. And I'll just turn over the time to Mr. Richard.
I just want to say thanks again for everybody. Thanks to our students and thanks for all the guest speakers. Super interesting, and I appreciate your time. I know our students appreciate your time, and thank you. Mahalo. Aloha Friday, everybody. And everybody, the students, we'll see you Monday at 9. Yeah, Leala?
Yes, I'll see you guys then. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Aloha, thank you.
Aloha Friday.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Aloha.